Hello, Denise Hazelwood back with more on the JFK cut and paste assassination. Before I get into the main part of today's presentation, which is on the first shot, I just want to quickly go over a couple of things. This should have been perhaps in the last video, but I'm putting it here because I want to reiterate that the Zapruder film cannot be trusted. In fact, I don't believe any of the assassination films can be trusted. There's a YouTube video that you can check out for yourself. Here's the URL that says the Much More film suggests frames were removed from the Zapruder film. And it does this by taking a look at the limousine tail light. And as you can see, the right rear tail light is engaged. My point on the Much More film is that this video actually kind of proves that the Much More film was altered too, because the limousine does not stop or slow down in the Much More film any more than it does in the Zapruder film. So the other thing I want to point out is I've already pointed out this quote right here that seconds later the cavalcade was gone. The area still reeked with the smell of gunpowder. I pointed that out when I was talking about the nose witnesses. However, there's another quote in this same newspaper, Chicago Tribune, November 23rd, 1963, that says, down on the street there was chaos. Treasury agents in the Secret Service bodyguard fired submachine guns at the building. And of course, in the official version of events, no Secret Service agents fired any weapons. But here's that in the Chicago, right around the J.D. Tippett picture in the Chicago article. Down here, you can find the area still reeking with gun smoke, quote. All right, today's presentation is part 4, the first shot, because what I think about the first shot differs from what the Zapruder film shows you, but we've already shown that the Zapruder film is not to be trusted, and in fact disagrees with what a lot of researchers think, who, if these researchers either trust the Zapruder film or have it so firmly ingrained in their consciousness that it's hard to let go of it. Even though they don't trust the later frames of it, especially showing the back of the head blowout. All right. So since there is evidence that the films were altered or fabricated, what do? You go to the witnesses. So let's take a look at what some of the witnesses said. First of all, Abraham Zapruder, remembering his confusion in his Warren Commission testimony when shown this early image of what was purported to be his film. His confusion that something hadn't already happened, and this is before the limousine goes behind the sign. So a lot of researchers point to the Malcolm Kilduff head point, showing that there was a frontal shot that struck Kennedy. In fact, I agree that there was a frontal shot that struck Kennedy. It's just where this shot occurred that my opinions differ from those of other researchers. And I'll give you the evidence for my opinions momentarily. But anyway, the Assistant Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff announced the president's death at a press conference in Parkland Hospital, and he pointed to his forehead when he said, "Dr. Berkeley tells me that it was a simple matter of a bullet right through the head." I think he might have said brain, actually. I might be slightly misquoting there. But he also said later, "Where did the bullet enter?" And Kilduff said it was the right temple. So there's a bit of discrepancy between his pointing to his forehead and saying temple. I like the forehead. This was corroborated by Dr. Charles Crenshaw, one of the attending physicians at Parkland Hospital, who said that he took a careful look at the body because he wanted to be sure to remember it. And he saw the back of the head blowout, he saw the throat wound, and he saw this wound in the forehead. Uh, this photographer, who was a friend of one of Richard Knudsen, who processed some of the autopsy photographs, said that his friend Knudsen showed him some photographs that showed a wound right there, pointing to his head in that same general location. And then he was shown later photographs that showed no wound there, which is very interesting considering what we're going to see in the stare of death autopsy photograph. Quentin Schwinn was a student at the Rochester Institute of Technology who was shown autopsy photographs as part of a CIA recruitment pitch. And apparently this image, which Schwinn commissioned by a medical illustrator, shows what one of the photographs he was showed. All right, and like I said, this no front of the head blowout, just this tiny wound up here in the forehead. However, the stare of death autopsy photograph shows all kinds of things going on. Yeah, there's something up here. Other photographs seem to show that there's a little triangle shape right around in here. But there's also this front of the head blowout in the autopsy photographs, not seen by the Parkland witnesses. So take the autopsy photographs with a grain of salt. Oh, sorry. That's a repeat of what I said, except the color version of the image. One very important witness was Governor John Connally, who was in the car the president was riding in, and who was also wounded during the assassination. And I'd like to point out something that Governor Connally said. Let me find it. Sorry, I thought I had it up. There it is. Thought I had it up and ready to go. Here it is.
And then we had just turned the corner. We heard a shot.
All right, so there's two things of interest going on. We had just turned a corner. We heard a shot. But also note that the cut from the close-up view here to the wider view there is very interesting. I don't know what's going on with that, but I do like his statement. We had just turned a corner. We heard a shot. Okay. Another witness is Pierce Allman, who was a radio personality, I think later television personality, who said, and they turned the corner and then boom. So we're going to take a look at what Pierce Allman had to say.
And Mr. Kennedy would brush the hair out of his face, and he had this sort of wave, and as they turned, I think I took a couple of steps over and said something like, "Hey, welcome to Dallas, Mr. President," and they turned the corner, and then boom, just
Like,
yeah, they were.
have it marked off with X's, right?
Well, yeah, that's the second shot and the third shot. The first shot, they were right about with the lamppost, and
Oh, I don't know.
you hear it, and it was coming from straight in front and above, and
Okay. So, one thing that Allman said was, where was it coming? Where was the car? It was by the lamppost. So I wanted to know where the lamppost was. I looked up images of Dealey Plaza. You can see a couple of lampposts here. There's one right here next to the building here, but I think he was referring, it looked like he was referring, based on his angle, to this one. On the other hand, when he said boom, he was more pointed more towards the corner. So I just find that interesting. And the fact that I think that there was a frontal shot is also interesting because here's the assassin's window right here, the one that it was claimed that the shots were coming from. There's no other window. The only other high place would be closer down to the would be the overpass as the next high place where a frontal shot could have occurred after the turn on Elm Street. So it could also have occurred from one of these other windows. If you look at photographs, you can see that there were a number of windows, like on this side of the sixth floor, that were also open. But witnesses seem to put it here. So anyway, I kind of like his angle more towards the corner as making a frontal shot possible. But when you remember also that the limousine was reported as making a wide turn onto Elm Street, and then it pulled over to the left, and then it kind of went back to the center lane. So there may have been more opportunities for a frontal shot from this window than people realized. The next witness I'd like to point out is Tony Glover, who came out some 40 years after the assassination. And in interviews, and an interview with her, she said, "They turned the corner and his head exploded." So I'm going to play a little bit of that interview right now. Sorry about that. There we go.
Dressed in a blue parka, and her mother arrived early at Dealey Plaza. A pedestal would provide a panoramic view.
I could see when he turned onto Houston, went around the corner, and all the way down to the underpass.
It was perfect.
They looked up and smiled and waved. I was just so thrilled. And then he turned the corner, and his head exploded.
Graphic, yes. And
okay, they turned the corner, and his head exploded. The girl in the blue can also be seen in the Robert Hughes film, and there's an animated GIF available online. I'm going to show you that momentarily. And there's some interesting things going on in that. Oh, nope, wrong one. Sorry. Interesting things going on in that. Come on. Where is it? I'm sorry. I don't want the YouTube. There it is. Sorry. Okay, so here's an animation or a repeat of frames. It's in a loop. You can see Tony Glover right here. You can't see the person who was on the other side of her. I'm not sure why that is. But one thing I want to point out, here's the limousine. There goes the limousine turning. Okay, we're going to watch it again. And watch the reaction of this bystander here. She's like, what the heck was that? You know, she's not following the limousine down Elm Street. She's turning to the person next to her. It's just, you know, that's not conclusive by any means, but it's certainly interesting. However, I've got another witness. This is that same edition of the Chicago Tribune that I pointed out a couple of things earlier in this presentation. Talks about a boy, Alan Smith, 14 years old, who said, "The car was about 10 feet from me when the bullet hit the president in his forehead. The bullets came from a window right over my head in the building in front of which my friends and I were standing." So I've tried to find this Alan Smith in some of the images. This is from the Bettman Corbis image, which, you know, most people don't realize is a composite. And I believe it's a composite made of the Zapruder film and other assassination images. And there are two kids here, this one here, and then this young man here. who bear a resemblance to a couple of kids that are visible in the Altgen 6 photograph right here. Could one of these be Alan Smith? I don't know, but I leave that question open. Most interest was that he was shot in the forehead, and it came from a window right above his head. There's actually some medical evidence of a frontal shot, and I'm going to talk about Dr. Michael Chesser, whose a presentation you can view online at this address. So he's saying a couple of things of interest. He's saying that they obscured facial bones in this copy of the X-ray published by the HISCA, which is interesting. That's the dark area, I believe. But he also notes that in that same forehead region, there is something going on, tiny metallic fragments that are, quote, highly suggestive of an entry in this location. Because apparently it's a forensic principle that if a bullet fragments upon entering or smaller pieces travel less far than larger pieces. Larger pieces travel further. The larger pieces do. So the fact that he sees some metallic debris in the X-ray at the National Archives, right in the same location, is very interesting. Now, there are a couple of things, caveats to take with the X-rays, because these X-rays in the National Archives are not authentic. There is a burn mark on the X-rays. Now, Gerald Custer, in his ARRB interview, talks about a burn mark which he believes that his boss, Dr. Ebersole, deliberately obscured by burning the X-ray. Unfortunately, he doesn't tell us where that burn mark is. In this lateral or side X-ray, Dr. Chesser sees a burn mark, but it's not in the emulsion. The burn mark is like a picture of a burn mark rather than an actual burn mark. And this X-ray is supposed to be the, quote, original. Another thing of interest comes not from Dr. Chesser, but from Dr. Mantic, who took a look at the X-rays. And this white area back in here, he says, is a forgery. How does he know this? He took a machine called an optical densitometry machine, and he measured the amount of whiteness on the X-rays. And he said, according to the measurements he got from that machine, this white patch area is way too dense. The bone is way too thick and dense to have anything to do with reality. It's more dense than what's usually the thickest bone of the skull, the petrous bone. So take the medical evidence, the X-rays, with a grain of salt, just like the autopsy photographs, which, by the way, autopsy back of the head photographs fail stereoscopic viewing. That's another finding of Dr. Mantic. So I'll talk more about that in my next presentation. I want to talk about DPD motorcycle officer Bobby Hargis, who was told by another officer shortly after the assassination that there was something on his lip. So I want to pull that up and show you what he says here. Oh man, a couple of things here. He was pulling into position when the first shot was fired, and a fellow officer saying that there was something on his lip. So here we go.
The first shot was tremendous. You couldn't tell where the shot was coming from.
Let me back it up there. Come on.
Main Street onto Elm Street. It was the first chance I'd got to pull up.
Come on, Internet, don't quit on me now. Well, apparently I'm not going to get that statement that he was pulling into position when the first shot was fired, which is at about 56 seconds into this video. Hopefully I can get the other statement. Come on. Yeah, maybe I got it elsewhere. Let's try this. Well, it's there. You can find this video and look it up yourself.
Well, that's me right there. We're now here in Dealey Plaza, 1963. He was coming north on Houston Street, turning left on Elm Street. Well, about 2 or 3 meters down Elm Street, the first shot rang out. And
All right, 2 to 3 meters is not very far. It's only about 6 to 9 feet. I'm going to try and play that one clip about something on his lip, because that's a very important clip. And let's try that again.
Regular assigned spot was. And then we turned left. It's a real short block there between Main and Elm Street. And we turned left again. And I was pulling up into my position when the first shot was fired. We was going down into the depression, goes under the triple underpass, where the echo of the first shot was tremendous. You couldn't tell where the shot was coming from.
There's another motorcycle officer by the name of Buddy Brewer that came up to me and said, "Bob, you have something on your lip." And he tucked his finger like that, and it was a piece of the president's brain and a piece of his skull bone that had hit me on the lip.
All right, so everybody points to that piece of the president's brain and skull bone that had hit him on the lip as evidence that that the third shot was fired from the grassy knoll or whatever. But in fact, if we take a look at Hargis in the Altkin 6 photograph, which, here's the turn back here. Here's Clint Hill looking at the limousine, or actually more looking towards the driver. I believe he's about to tell the driver, "Hey, I'm taking off. I'm going to run to the limousine." And we've already talked about George Hickey facing back to the Texas School Book Depository, which, by the way, this is the front door of the School Book Depository, and the building extends past out where the Alkins photograph shows it. But if we look at Hargis in this, take a close look at Hargis, we see that there is something on his lip. Now, in that video, he pointed to his left lip. In here, this object, whatever it is, appears to be attached to his right lip and cheek, just to the side of his nose on the right. So exactly when Bobby Hargis was sprayed with that matter, the blood and brains, I don't think we can assume it was the third shot. He might have been sprayed again with the third shot, but I think this piece of whatever, bone or whatever, came from the first shot, which would have been my entry on the forehead above the right eyebrow, to the back of the head blowout. So this might be the Harper fragment. It might be something else. It's hard to discern exactly the shape. You can see it kind of goes like that, like that, like that, choop, like that, like that. So it does kind of look like the Harper fragment a little bit. There's another fragment that was supposed to have come off of Kennedy from the Dr. Mantic describes this as frontal bone. The only evidence we have is an X-ray of it. So I don't necessarily completely buy that the triangular fragment is authentic. But anyway. Okay. So things he said again, he went about 2 or 3 meters down Elm Street when the first shot rang out, which is, again, 6 to 9 feet. Hargis believes that there were only 2 shots. He believed in the single bullet theory. the one that hit Kennedy in the back, and then Governor Connolly in the back and into his wrist and thigh. But that single bullet theory just does not wash for me. We can talk about reactions in the Zapruder film, even though it is not authentic. The beauty of realizing that it's not authentic is that I can take what I like and dismiss what I don't. So I think Kennedy has already been hit by this point. We see Clint Hill looking at the limousine. We see George Hickey, and where he's looking is not at the crowds who are over up here. Their faces, their hands are up here. He's looking down more towards their feet or towards the curb. And Kenneth Scarce points out that we also have this agent Jack Reddy, who's also looking to the left. Now, agents are trained to look on their side of the limousine. His job was to look at the crowds on the right side of the limousine, over this way. But instead, he's looking across the car to see perhaps what's captured Hickey's attention. And what that is that has captured Hickey's attention, again, I'm going back to the Bettman Corbis image, which is a photographic collection. There's no photographer attributed to this image, and I believe that's because it's a composite image. If we look at Tim McIntyre, he's behind Clint Hill. Clint Hill, his gaze is towards the presidential limousine in the Bettman Corbis image. But we look at Tim McIntyre, his gaze, like Hickey in the Zapruder film, is downward. And what I believe he's looking at, if you take a close look, you can see this red something at the feet of one of the bystanders in the Bettman Corbis image. And it may be that this piece didn't even land there, that maybe what Hickey's looking at down and to the left, he could possibly be looking at Bobby Hargis, but it's clear with the angle of his head that he is not looking at the people. So the difference between the Bettman Corbis image and the Alkins photograph is in Bettman Corbis, you see Clint Hill's arm here. In Alkins, his arm is extended, and his gaze is more towards the driver than towards the presidential limousine. So I believe that his arm started out here, and then it came down here, and here he's telling the driver, I'm going to make a run for the limousine. All right, another thing I want to talk about is this. We have witnesses who talk about Kennedy grabbing his chest or his throat. And we see that in the Alkins image. Now, I don't completely buy that the image is totally authentic. I do like the hands here because that kind of chest grab is described by witnesses. What I don't like about the Alkins image is his arm that's supposedly coming out this way with Jackie's hand holding his arm and the angle of his shoulder coming out this way. I cannot get my own arm to do that. So I don't really like this as authentic, although I do like the hands at the top of the chest as authentic. We see that chest grab in the Zapruder film too, and we see his elbows way out to the side. I don't necessarily like that. I do like that there was a chest grab. I just don't think this image is necessarily representative of it, and I'll show you that why that in frame 226. This was frame 230 where his arms are most extended out to the side, and in this frame 226 his arms are rising into that chest grab position. But if you take a look at this arm right here, we have this hump that's looks like it's supposed to be the seat back for Governor Connolly's um, seat, which we've seen in other images of the limousine, is actually very thin. So we've got this here. But in 226, we've got Kennedy's arm, forearm to elbow, whatever, in front of that seat, rising. And that, of course, is impossible. We also have a discrepancy between the angle of his shoulder and the angle of his sleeve as it's supposed to be rising. So I don't really, I like that there was a chest grab. I just, and there's some support for it in the images, but I don't believe that the images are entirely authentic. That throat grab, chest grab has been called Thorburns position. If you Google Thorburns position, you'll find a couple of images. This is one of them, and that looks nothing like the chest grab that Kennedy was supposed to have done. We have a loose hand, whereas in the Alkins photograph, we have a tight fist, right? Even in the extant Zapruder film, we have what looks like a tight fist. Yet this Thorburns position, one of the images of it, and the two images of the Thorburns position don't even look like each other, much less what Kennedy was doing. The sand is loose. The sand looks kind of loose. The hands are not in front of the chest. So, here we go with another image, so-called, of Thorburns position. Now the hands are in front of the chest. They're in the right location, but look, they're not clenched in a fist. The fingers are open. Here the fingers are curled, but they're not clenched into a fist. And when you do the Google search, these are the only two images that you will find. And you will find the Kennedy name associated, JFK's name associated with these two images. You don't really find any other medical accounts of Thorburns' position. However, there is a position that involves fists at the chest, and it's called decorticate posture. Another aspect of decorticate posture is that the legs straighten. There were some witnesses who seemed to remember Kennedy jumping up or rising up or standing up in the car. Now remember, he was confined in the seat in the back of the car. He wasn't lying down like our model for decorticate posture is. But we've got the hand position here, right? And this looks an awful lot like what we see of Kennedy's hands in the Alkins 6 photograph. The thing about decorticate posture is that this decorticate posture is indicative of severe brain trauma, right? This Thorburns position was supposedly indicative of damage on the cervical spine at the throat area, but decorticate posture is damage to the brain. And as it turns out, we actually have more evidence than just that something was going on with the first shot. And I'd like to point out Warren Taylor. We see Warren Taylor in the Alkins photograph with his door open. All right, it's open door. This hand has been described as holding a, quote, phantom revolver. That's described by other researchers. It's just, phantom revolver because the photograph has been altered to hide it, but you can see that the hand looks like it's kind of in position to be holding a gun, but it's very weird. It looks like it's melting through the glass of the window. It's just bizarre. I'm going to play a little bit of the Muchmore film because in that film we actually see the door opening. Let me find it. There we go. Okay, there's the president's limousine turning the corner. The motorcycle escort, the follow-up car. There's Johnson's limousine, and then, did you see it? I'll try and stop it there. Here it comes. There it is. That is the person who is sitting in that location. This is Johnson's Secret Service follow-up car. The person who was sitting in that location was Special Agent Warren Taylor. So again, you can look up any version of the Muchmore film that has the limousine turning the corner from Maine onto Houston, and you'll see that camera jiggle and the door opening. So we go back to the this very briefly and watch what happens next. No, and then it cuts to the Knoll area of Elm Street. Okay. You can also see that open door in the Hughes film. I'm not going to go there because it doesn't show the door opening, it just shows it open. But if we look at Warren Taylor's statements that were included in the Warren Commission documents, we get something very interesting. He says that our automobile had just turned a corner, and there we saw in the Muchmore film it turning from Maine onto Houston. When I heard a bang, which sounded to me like a possible firecracker, I noticed what now seems to me might have been a short piece of streamer flying in the air close to the ground. Well, I don't think it was a short piece of streamer. I think it was a piece of Kennedy's skull. And actually, I don't even think he saw that before he opened the door. I think he was reacting to seeing the rifle in the window and either accidentally confused events, seeing the rifle, then seeing the streamer, seeing the rifle opening his door, then seeing the streamer, or deliberately obfuscating events. So he says in his statement that when he saw that, he opened the door and prepared to get out of the car. So he opened the door after the turn onto Houston Street, not after the turn onto Elm Street. Researcher named Robert Harris points out that the Robert Hughes film has damaged frames at exactly the same point that the Tina Towner film has a damaged frame, and then Harris estimates 7 missing frames after this damaged frame. And the frames of the Towner film look altered, and I'll show you that in just a minute. So one thing about the Robert Hughes film is that it does show a little bit of that 6th floor sniper's window. Now, even if my first shot scenario is wrong, you should still be able to see something in that window because your shooter would be getting into place for a shot fired a few seconds, 5 seconds after that. And that we don't see that at all. I'm going to show you a couple of studies of that window. One that says there is movement, another that says there is not movement. Let's see, much more film. Oops. Sorry, that one I'm going to show in a minute. Towner film. Okay, I'm going to show this one first. This is a Gerda Dunkel posting on YouTube. And I might come back to it in a minute too. This is what we see of that window in the Hughes film. And then she changes settings and shows it again. All right, now here's a study. Oops, sorry, back to. Here's a study on a documentary on the window in the Hughes film. Let's hear what
There
this
is
guy said.
movement in the sixth floor corner window indicating the presence of a person.
Just 7 seconds before the first shot is fired, something moves in the corner window.
Yeah, I didn't see that in the Gerda Dunkel version, and trust me, I was watching that very closely. Let's look at it again.
Something moves in the corner window.
So, I don't know. There's like we see with the Zapruder film history, with the film going to the Hawkeye Works, the CIA photographic lab, before it was processed for the second time by the National Photographic Interpretation Center. There's a bit of a story on the Hughes film about how it was given to authorities by Robert Hughes, and then many days later finally analyzed and came back from that analysis. No, there's nothing. There's no figure in that window in the Hughes film. So I kind of think that the Hughes film underwent the same type of alteration that the Zapruder film did. And this, I'm going to show this one more time. Take one more look at it.
Presence of a person.
Just 7 seconds before the first shot is fired, something moves in the corner window.
Now watch again this other version of the Hughes film. Yeah, come on. The Gerda Dunkel version. So I think what was going on there was probably they wanted to hide the shooter in the window to hide the Secret Service in action, the President's Secret Service in action to the first shot, except for George Hickey, and de-emphasize that the Vice President's Secret Service detail seemed to be reacting a whole lot faster than the president's, reacting even before the first shot was fired, as we'll see later. So, okay. I do want to talk about the Tina Turner film a little bit. Again, Robert Harris said that there was this damaged frame showing the limousine in the turn, and it's followed by a splice where 7 frames were removed from the Tina Turner film. And I am going to suggest that not only were frames removed, but the frames were altered. So I'm going to show you a couple of things here. I'm going to show you the Tina Turner film as it is. And that's about it. I'm going to take it back. I want go ahead and watch it again. Keep your eyes on Kennedy and notice how strange he looks. He kind of looks strange. We're going to take a closer look at him momentarily. A little bit pasted in, his head at odd angles, and we're going to take a look at that again. Let me show you this same film. Where'd it go? Sorry about that. Here it is. I scrubbed through to create kind of a slow motion, scrubbed through the same frames that you just saw to create a slow motion version of the film. And watch Kennedy's head here. Look how square it is. Look how it's got kind of an odd shadow pasted effect around his, like, the space above his nose, and he's supposedly looking at the crowds there. His nose seems to come and go. Now, Robert Harris thinks that hand balling into a fist right there, that's a reaction to the shot, and there was the damaged frame, there's the missing frames. I think it was just kind of, oops, now watch his head some more. And I was watching for, I'm going to pause it right here just briefly. I was watching for those lampposts that Pierce Allman mentioned, and I can't find them on the Towner film. They should be visible. One researcher has pointed out that the person in the Altkins photograph, this man right here, there's a woman with him, and he seems to be holding a baby or a toddler, does not appear in the Towner film. We get a couple of men with hats. There does not seem to be a woman next to either one of them. Neither one of them seems to be holding a baby. It's kind of interesting that that character does not exist in both the Altkins photograph and the Towner film. Okay, back to my PowerPoint here. If you look at Kennedy's head, this is a different version of the Towner film that was available on YouTube. If you watch Kennedy's head in this slow motion version, you see how square it is. If you follow the angle of his back, if you follow this shading here, it actually looks like he's slumped forward. But this darkening right there, that square blotch, makes it look like he's kind of looking at the audience, but at a really odd angle of his head. And here's another image kind of showing that same sort of thing. And here we get some more images. Like I said, I think he's really slumped forward, but they put this sort of blockish thing there to make him look like he's looking at the bystanders. And look at this image. This is just totally bizarre. And this one, also totally bizarre. So I don't think that the Towner film is terribly authentic. I'm going to go back and show you a little bit more because there's more I want you to see. I'm going to scrub back here. There it is. Right there. See the little heart right above Jackie's head? I don't think that's an accidental scratch or anything. I think that is a deliberate addition to the film to kind of draw attention to Jackie and away from Kennedy, who's kind of sloppily pasted in there. All right. So in summary, I do believe that the first shot happened right after the limousine turned onto Elm Street. There are witness accounts of that happening. We see a reaction by Warren Taylor in the Muchmore film as the limousine is turning or in the process of turning or is about to turn onto Elm Street. We see a reaction by George Hickey in the extant Zapruder film, looking down at something towards the feet of the bystanders on the road or on the curb or something like that. I originally thought that he was looking at where the first shot missed, and but now I think he was actually looking at a piece of skull that landed there. We see Bobby Harge's cheek in Altkin 6. Oh, and by the way, that piece of skull he was looking at may not have landed on the road. It's just, we see that in the Bettman Corbis, and that's why I was thinking that. It might have landed on Harge's cheek, which we see in the Altkin 6 has something attached to the right side of his lip and cheek. Additionally, there's no turn in the Zapruder film. The Towner film has the turn. In fact, it's mostly the turn, but that's a weird film and it looks rather altered to me. We have the Kilduff and Crenshaw head points. We have the chest grab, which is indicative of decorticate posture rather than Thorburns position. And we saw in the x-rays that there was some evidence for a frontal shot, i.e. the small metallic fragments right in that forehead entry area. So we have to take the medical evidence with a grain of salt, however. Next time I'm going to talk about the medical evidence cover-up and the evidence for the medical cover-up and my take on all that. So thank you for watching. Stay tuned for next time.